During the summer months, fishing shallow is super important. The fish spend a lot of time in the upper layers, and that's exactly where you need to target them. But it's not just a case of getting one rig out of your box and expecting to catch all day long. There's many different situations which need different rigs and different styles of fishing to get the most out of your day. So in this video, I'm going to be giving you my full guide to shallow fishing to ensure that you get the best out of your next fishing session. Right then, so my full guide to shallow fishing. Like I said, it's not just the case these days of picking up one rig and expecting to catch on that all of the time. There's many different scenarios and different things you need to think about to pick the best one for you. So if you're unsure of what shallow fishing is, it's basically fishing up in the water layers, and normally when the temperature's hot, fish spend a lot of time very close to the surface, and it's the perfect way to target them. So I've got 5 rigs today, and I'm going to go through, perhaps catch 1 or 2 fish on each, show you how to use them, when to use them and stuff like that. So hopefully when you go to your peg in your next session, you can pick which one's going to be best for you, and you can catch a load of fish on it. So one important thing when fishing shallow is always to keep a steady little flow of bait going in. So while I'm just sitting here talking to you, you might see me throwing the odd pellet or caster in. We're going to come on to baits in a moment, but yeah, it's very, very important to keep that activity going, because you want to make as much competition as you can up in the water, and you're going to catch a lot of fish. So let's get straight into it then. Now we're going to start off with, in my opinion, the ultimate shallow rig, but lots of places you can't use it. It's banned. I've done a full video on pretty much all of these rigs, so if you want a very detailed video on this particular rig, there'll be all the links in the description. But this rig is the Overshotted rig. If your venue allows to overshot, I would say 90% of the time it will be the rig that you catch the most fish on. It's just so good, it's become really popular, and it's almost unbeatable in the right situation. So fishing the Overshotted rig, all of the kits today are short top kits with either red or orange slick elastic in, but you're gonna have to match your elastic to the size of the fish you're fishing for. There's nothing massive in here, but there's lots of fish, so red or orange slick is good. But you want quite a lot of elastic, because when you hook the fish, you do want them to swim out of your peg, and they're not then interrupting other fish that are feeding. Now onto the rig. So we've got 018 mainline, I've got a 0.1 gram float, but that float is pretty much irrelevant because I've got too much shot incorporated in my rig. So I've got 3 number 10s just underneath the float, that actually sinks the float, and I've got 1 number 9 just above my hook link, and that's pretty much the rate it will sink. So it's overshotted by about 1 or 2 number 9s basically, and that's enough to keep everything nice and tight, and it's a self-hooking rig, that's why it's so good. I've got a 4-inch hook link onto a little band, because what we're going to be doing is either fishing casters or pellets. Now I must admit, when you're fishing overshotted, I think casters are the best bait, because normally the overshotted rig is best when you're trying to catch either F1s, small carp or eyed, something like that. Fish that are notoriously hard to catch, which you might see as we go through the rigs when you're fishing a conventional float and getting bites. So I'm just going to go with casters to start with, and we'll show you how to fish the overshotted rig. So like I said, that float is overshotted, so it's going to go under. So I'm not looking for the float, I'm just going to pop my rig in, and then we're going to lower the pole tip to the water, and then every few seconds or so you just give it a little lift and a strike up, and there we go, we've got one straight away. Like I said, we were feeding a bit of bait out there as well, but that's how effective this rig is, purely because they just hook themselves. So when you're fishing a conventional float and you're trying to strike bites and stuff like that, lots of the time the fish bring your bait in, spit it out, and you don't see that bite. Oh, got my net caught there. And it makes a real big difference when you're overshot. And there we go, a nice F1 to kick off the session. Like I said, these are the fish that are incredibly hard to catch. F1s and eyed are very, very difficult fish to deal with. So I'm just going to unhook this one, and I'm going to see if we can repeat that. I'm just going to go straight back in with that one, because that was so quick. You didn't really get a chance to see what happened there. But there's another thing to notice on my rig here. Normally I'd have my float right at the end of elastic, because the float is obviously absolutely irrelevant. but you have to have a 4-inch gap. This is one of the rules here. So you have to adapt your rigs to the rules, but it has to be 4-inch between your float and your tip of your elastic. So that's why there is. But if it wasn't, I'd push that right up there and it would make this rig even better. And even better still, if you've got a venue that you don't even need to use a float, then you're going to catch an awful lot more fish. So if you don't need to use a float, don't put a float on there. But basically what overshotting is making that float redundant. So we're going to feed some bait. Like I said, we need to get that competition going, and it's all about finding the right depth. So my entire rig on there here is about 16 inches. So I'm going to flick it in, I'm going to lower it to the water, and then we're going to jig it up. And you're just going to do that while feeding. So you get used to it, you get it into your hand, and there we go, got another one on straight away. I can't explain how good that rig is when you're fishing shallow. It's quite actually hard to feed enough sometimes because you're catching so many fish. And yeah, the last match I fished recently, unfortunately managed to come second in a Maver qualifier. That was using this rig, and the person who won also was using it. So the Overshotted rig was first and second the last match I fished. And if you're allowed to use it, trust me, you will catch a lot of fish doing it. So there we go, second fish. I don't know how long I've been fishing, but it's only a couple of minutes. And that is the Overshotted rig in a nutshell. Should I catch one more because it's so quick? Right, we'll catch one more, and then on the other rigs, probably what I'll do is I'll only catch 1 or 2, because they're not going to be slow, because shallow fishing in general is good, but they're not going to be as good as this. So one of the questions I did get asked when I was fishing a full video of this is, how deep are you fishing? Well, you're obviously fishing the full depth of your rig, so your hook to your elastic, because it's holding the pole tip in the water, you are fishing the full depth of that. So you can see it's 18 inches there, I'm a couple inches, so I'm about 16 inches deep. So the entire length of your rig is how deep you are fishing with this. Right, let's catch one more, and then we'll move on to another rig. As always, before you go out, your best to give it a bit of bait. Now those fish are going to be coming up waiting for you. It's really, really important to get that competition going. We're going to swing the rig out, we're going to lower it, and then we're just going to carry on that little flick. And the little flick on the water as well, you'd be surprised that you think it would scare them off, but a lot of the time, that's one of the things that attracts them. It's making a little bit of noise, they're trying to think, where's that bait? I can hear it, but I can't see it, and then they grab hold of it. But if you're not getting one straight away, feed a bit more bait, and there we go. There's another fish. I think this time is an eyed, so I think that shows like the 2 hardest fish probably to catch is F1s and eyed, and this rig makes it an absolute doddle. Some people say it doesn't take any skill, but trust me, the same people are winning whether they're using this or not. So it does take skill, it does take getting used to it. To find someone who's really good at overshotting, they are incredibly hard to beat. But that's overshotting in a nutshell. I'll get this fish put back. If you want a full rundown of that, check the link in the description. Right then, on to rig number 2. And rig number 2 is the Jigger float. Now, it's quite similar to overshotting, but it's not quite as finesse. And that's why I don't quite think it's as good. But a lot more venues allow this. So it's the closest thing you can get to what I think is pretty much perfection on the overshot. I think the overshot is always best. This comes a very close second if rules don't allow you to fish with an overshotted rig. So let's just keep a bit of bait going in. So the way I set up my Jigger float, again, short top gear, orange slick elastic. Now Jigger float is basically an inline float that runs freely on the line in between 2 stops. And the 2 stops is the difference and the depth that you can work your baiting. So my top stop here is 13 inches and my bottom one is about 5. So I can work my bait between 13 and 5 inches and jig it, make movement in it like we were with the overshotted rig, and it's very, very attractive. Again, I have to leave a gap here because venue rules say that my float can't get any closer than 4 inches to the end. But if it didn't, again, I would move that stop right up and I would work the float as high as I could towards my elastic, because that does make a very good difference. But the only reason I think this isn't quite as good as the overshotted rig is because this inline float does create a little bit of tension, especially when it gets wet, your line sticking to it. If you just have a single number 9 and get that slow fall, it doesn't always freely fall through the float. So you have to have a few more shot to make it work and make sure the float isn't sticking to the line and stuff like that. So I've got 4 number 9s on as a bulk, and that's enough weight to make sure it all pulls nicely. I can keep nice and tightly through the rig, and it makes the jigger float very, very effective. Again, my short 4-inch hook link, size 14, bait band, and again, the baits really are pellets and casters. Let's go pellets this time, try and see if we can catch a carp, but there's so many F1s and that in here, it's very hard sometimes to target carp. So working it is very similar, I'll be very honest with you, in the way that you use the jigger float, sorry, the overshotted rig. The only difference is, like I said, we're not really lowering it into the end of the pole, we're working it in between those stops. So get to your stop and just work that last little bit of the rig. So you can see there, look, a couple of times there I can feel fish have swam into it, but I've not hooked them. I think I would have hooked those on an overshotted rig. So I'm just going to flick again, and all you do is you're just working that bait. It's all about keeping your bait movement, and you can lower the bait. There you go, got on. The good thing about the jigger is you can lower the bait at the sort of rate that you want it to fall, so you can hold it and you can be a little bit more patient with it. To be fair, I did put a pellet on there, so probably that's why it took a little bit longer, and we have got a little F1, so it did avoid an eye. Not that I want to avoid eye, because I absolutely love them, but pellets are a little bit more selective, and I think the jigger float probably is a little bit better for bigger carp as well. So I think the overshotted rig just catches absolutely everything. This, you can be a little bit more selective. So we've got an F1 that time, absolutely perfect. I mean, both of these are superb ways of catching fish. So let's slip that one back and we'll catch another one on it. Bait wise, I'll quickly show you. So I've got my casters. Like I said, I think if you're fishing shallow nowadays, you can't go without pints of casters. If I was in a really important match, I'd be taking 6 to 8 pints. Yes, I know it's expensive, but you're absolutely blasting it. You're trying to get as many fish in your swim as you can, and when you're fishing rigs like this, you don't foul hook them. So basically you need a lot of bait, loads of fish, and you're doing really well. But let's go a bit more cost effective. Pellets, everything eats pellets. There's 2 that I use. I like these F1 Sweet from Dynamite. They're the yellow ones. You can see on my hands, look, they give a little bit of a coating, and I think that leaks off as they go into the water. And I honestly do think that creates a very good sort of aroma in the upper layers as those pellets hit and it leaks off. And then you've got your standard coarse pellet. Lots of fisheries nowadays needs to have fishery only pellets. These aren't fishery only, these are Dynamite Swim Stim, but if your fishery rule has just used their pellets, then this is what you're going to get a lot of the time. You're going to get standard coarse pellets, fishery pellets, and they do the job, to be honest with you. The rigs are more important than the bait, I think, when it comes to if you're fishing casters or pellets. But yeah, I have the yellow pellets, the standard fishery ones, and your casters. Out of those, you're going to find something that's going to catch a lot of fish. But for me, if I'm fishing pellets, normally it's these yellow ones, the F1 Sweet from Dynamite, that I like. So let's see if we can catch another one on the jigger. I mean, we are going to catch another one on there. There's a couple of different ways you can work the jigger. When I go in there, the first way that I would do it is I'd flick the float past, and then I'd let everything come back on a tight line. So flick it and then slowly let it all swing back in, get to that top stop, and then just work the last few inches. So you do need to have it at the right depth. There's no point having like 6 to 8 foot of line or 3 to 4 foot of line and then working it around it. I'm only working the float in there we go, we've got in that tiny little window, that 6 inches to 13 inch window. There's no point working it any more than that. But the important thing there is you need to find what depth the fish are feeding at. Obviously, if all the fish are feeding at 2 foot deep, I'm not going to be catching them because I'm fishing a bit too shallow for it. But if they're fishing shallow, then work your jigger nice and shallow. An actual carp this time, there we go. We said a little switch up to pellets would make a difference. Let's get that one back. The action is pretty thick and fast. I hope that I'm putting the information over to you as well as you need it, but the important things are to keep that feed going in, keep your rig tight. That's the whole point about why the Overshotted and the Jigger work so well. And yeah, if you are in a lake where you're catching 3 or 4 foot deep, this works absolutely fine. Just work your Jigger much deeper, 3 or 4 foot deep, and you'll have exactly the same result. So it's not a method that you have to fish super shallow, but it is a method that you have to stay in touch with and keep everything nice and tight. So you can see all the time my line is tight between the hook bait and the tip of my float, and you just really are bouncing it. You can give it a little, if you don't get a bite, you can give it a little slap, let it go again. You can see a few fish there. There we go. And then we can feed some more bait and we can come back. There we go, that's the Jigger float. Oh, I lost one. We'll go back out, probably messing around there. I don't want to end on a lost fish. But normally, you've got so many in there and competing that a lost fish isn't really going to put them off too much. Keep jigging away, bounce it to that stop. And if you do have a little period where it goes quiet, you might need to change the depth. You know, it's not necessarily going to be the rig that's wrong. It could just be the depth that's wrong. Oh, did you see that one flick out? That one literally just brushed onto my rig. And you can see when that float shoots sideways, that is probably a fish that's had the bait in its mouth. And with that slightly heavier bulk, you miss just the odd bite more. Not loads, this is still a very, very effective rig. But I think if I could put that Overshotted one back on, that's the difference between the two. And you're going to catch on all of them, but come on, we don't want to end on. Let's just give it another flick round. Maybe that, oh, that one grabbed it straight away then. Maybe that spooked fish did cause a little bit more disturbance than I thought, but you can clearly see there's lots of fish there. That's a rubbish throw. I'm only fishing about 9 meters, so with 6mm pellets I can throw them by hand and I can really make a difference in the way that I'm feeding, because feeding by hand, if you can fish close enough, you can feed so much more bait and so much quicker. Like I said, you don't really foul hook fish on this method, so you can be very aggressive with it. And there we go, we've got another one. Maybe there's a few carp moved in, because that did take a little bit longer, and the fish that we had one before was a carp, wasn't it? So this is an F1, but yeah, another cracking fish, and I think it demonstrates how effective the Jigger can be. It's an awesome way of catching. It wins absolutely loads of matches, and because it's not banned in as many places, it's quite often my go-to rig. So as it's my go-to on a lot of places, I might catch a couple more fish on it, and then we'll move on to the next rig. Oh, I really do love these two methods, the Overshot and the Jigger. They are becoming a lot more popular. They have become a lot more popular in the last few years, and yeah, they definitely catch a lot of fish. But we're going to get away from that like self-hooking rig now, because like I said, a lot of venues do ban both of them, so you can't use the Jigger or the Overshotted rig. So if that's the case, we need to look at something else. But there we go, if he behaves. Another F1, really not behaving. And yeah, they are just so much easier to catch on this. I did touch on it a little while ago, saying that these rigs take the skill out of it. I don't believe that that's probably the correct terminology. I think they probably make it a more level playing field, because they are hooking themselves to fish. But you'll still find the people who fish these rigs a lot, they're a bit more accurate with it, the feeding's better, the jigging and everything working the rig's better. So you still find if you put more effort in and you practice it more than someone else, you will be better at it, even though it is a slight leveler. But let's move on to now I'm going to say kind of fishing that's forgotten really, which is the conventional shallow fishing. So there's not many places that this is not going to be allowed because it's you know, it's within all the rules. The float floats. It's just fishing shallow, like we did sort of, you know, I got into fishing many years ago, and when that was fishing shallow like this was just, it was all we done. We didn't know about overshot, and we didn't know about jiggers and stuff like that. This used to be mega, still catches lots of fish, and if the rules say that you can't do the 2 rigs that they've already done, then this is a great option for you. So same again with the kits and elastics, same main line. I have got a small dibber, so it's a dibber shallow in 0.1 of a gram. Got a little bit of grease on there just to make sure it sits nicely so I can see the bite. But yeah, 0.1 of a gram, and then I've got 2 number 9s below it, 1 number 9 above it, because I want, again, everything's about keeping the rig nice and tight. A 4-inch hook link and my band again. All these rigs are pretty similar. The only difference between this one and let's say the Overshotted is this float is actually going to do what a float's going. I'm going to have to see the bites going under, and we're going to try and catch them like that. And that's why it's so important to use the minimum amount of line that I can between my float and my elastic. 4 inches is the smallest I can go here. It means I'm going to hit many more bites. If I was to have 2 foot of line here, that would be much harder to do. So if you're going to fish in a way where you're feeding like we have been, you're trying to catch fish within your feed, then I would have a nice short bit of line, and I would do it this way. Like I said, this rig pretty much isn't banned anywhere, so a lot of people will be familiar with this rig, but the frustration comes with it is when you're trying to hit bites. A lot of the time, you probably will see it, your float will go under, you're striking and there's nothing, and that's where sometimes the other rigs are better. See, there was a bite and I missed it. So the other rigs, that one was actually perfect. So it does catch a lot of fish still. You can see I just slapped it over there a little bit. Definitely still catch a lot of fish, but if you even it out throughout the day, all those little missed bites, if you miss 1 bite to every one you hook, 2 bites, then it is going to make a difference. So that's why the other rigs are so good. But like I said, we're missing all of there's no bands with this, and we're going to get, he was live, I'm not going to hold it eyed that time. Strange to catch an eyed when I'm feeding pellets. There's quite a few eyed there. I'd expect it on casters. There's loads and loads of eyed in this rig. But it's the same as the other 2 rigs. You need to feed positively. You can see there, before I'm going out, I'm just throwing sort of 6 to 8 pellets. Like I said, if I was fishing any further than this, if I'd gone past 11 meters, I'd just do the same, but with a catapult. And then again, we're just trying to catch fish right within that bait, trying to get as many fish up in the water as we possibly can and see if we can trick them that way. And like I said, the importance of this rig is that, that short little, it's a missed bite again, short little piece of line between the float, come on, get your throwing better, between your float and your pole tip, because you are hitting more bites. Another one I missed there. And it's really important to find the depth that the fish are feeding at. I pretty much know that because I've been catching, but again, this is a rig that you can fish a little bit deeper. I would change one thing if I'm fishing deeper, which I'll show you. But the other thing you can do is you can work it a little bit, sort of like we were with the other rigs. You can bounce it, just lift the float out, bounce it. It's not against the rules normally, double check it, but that float isn't overshotted, so you can create movement in your rig, and creating movement in your rig is super important normally. There we go, that one actually hooked itself, which the only way you're going to get that self hooking is if you do have that tiny little gap between your float and your pole tip. If you had a foot there, like I said, you'd be missing an awful lot of bite. They're so quick. That's the problem with these fish. They're just absolutely lightning quick. Calm down. There we go. F1. Cool little fish. Such a good way of fishing shallow. You can see why it wins an awful lot of matches. But what I was going to say, what I was going to show you is here, if I was to go deeper with this rig, so I'm only fishing sort of 10 inches deep now, if I was to go deeper, anywhere from 2 foot to 4 foot, I just use a float that's got a bristle on it, because it lets you see a lot more. So with a bristle you can see little dinks, and if you're getting little bites and stuff like that but you're not hooking anything, you probably know you're fishing a little bit too deep. So just having a bristled pole float on there does allow you to work out if you're fishing different depths or the wrong depths. But when I come anything sort of 18 inches or below, it's the dibber style pole float that I use, and we're catching them in the way like we are now. So feed some bait, 1 throw, 2 throws. So important to keep that bait going in, because you got to think, I'm the only one here currently doing it, but if you had a match on and other people fishing, then you would definitely need to feed more regularly, because people are dragging your fish away from you. Even when you're playing fish, you need to think about feeding. Another one's on there. That's the importance of that tiny little 4-inch gap between that. Oh, this one's really going for it. A couple of nicer F1s. Perhaps they've pushed those eyed out, but yeah, that's the conventional shallow rig, should I say, and it's the one that you might end up fishing an awful lot because the others are banned, and if they are, that is the way that I get the most out of my shallow fishing. So here we go, another F1. Get that one hooked, get it back. So quite a bit bigger, that one, and we will move on to the next rig. Right, okay, let's move on to the next rig. So those 3 rigs that we've talked through there, realistically, is when you're catching within your feed and you're trying to create what I've been doing, throwing lots of bait, lots of activity, lots of fish in your peg, and those are the 3 rigs, depending on rules, that you probably would select. But the next one I'm going to go on to is, we'll just wait for that train to go past. Next one to go on to is a rig that I would use for what is called slapping. Now, you can do a bit of feeding with this, but there's certain venues that fish, for some reason or another, normally big moody carp, they don't like the pole being over the head. They don't particularly like coming right in amongst all of that feed. So F1s and eyed and stuff like that, smaller carp, will definitely feed like they have today. Loads of bait, they'll come right amongst it. But certainly big wary carp sometimes don't enjoy that. So that's where this rig will come into play. And this is a rig that I would use if I'm slapping over a pellet normally. So again, short top kit. This has got red slick in it, so red or orange slick, like I said. 018 main line. But the main difference here is it's got a slightly different float, or a slightly bigger float, should I say. So this is a 0.2 gram dibber. And again, it's shotted, so it is actually a float, you know, it's not overshotted or anything like that. And I've got all of my shot in a bulk 4 inches above my hook link. So what this does is when I slap this in, we get 3 noises. We get the pole float makes a plop, the shot makes a plop, and my pellet makes a plop. So what you're trying to imitate is bait going in, but there's actually no bait there. The only thing that's there is your pellet. And that's really good for sometimes those big wary carp that don't want to come right underneath the pole tip, don't want to come in and run the hustle and bustle of loads of fish. It can do really well. And what the difference here is the length of line that I've got between my elastic and my float. Because we're rotating it over my pole, which I'll show you in a moment, we need a longer length of line, makes a nice slap. But to keep it nice and tight, I've got 2 number 8s evenly spaced out in that gap. So I'm still quite tight to my float, and you're not getting loads and loads of missed bites, because like I said, this is much more of a bigger carp tactic. So it's not going to be the best place to demonstrate it, because here there's just so many fish. But what we'll do is we'll go out there. So on places like Barston, Barston's probably the prime example. Barston is massive, and I wouldn't feed anything. All I'd do is I'd give 3 slaps, and then you wait to see if you get a bite. We had one straight away. And you can get away with literally, like some lakes, 5 hours fishing, and you don't need to feed anything because you're making the noise. And sometimes feeding is worse than actually putting loads of bait in. But you can see already how frustrating, this is why those other rigs are so much better, is when there's lots of fish in your peg, they're clearly attracted to that noise, but we're getting so many, it's pretty much going under straight away all the time. There we go, we got one that time. And you catch them on the slap, but see how many bites I missed there? And that's because I've got that longer length of line between my elastic in my pole tip and my float. That longer length line definitely makes you miss more bites, but when you're fishing in this style, it's an eye this time, it's a rare fish to catch on this method, but when you're fishing this style, realistically, you're targeting bigger carp. So those missed bites that you're seeing me get there, you definitely get a lot less of them. You know, they're much more positive. You could sit there and slap for 5 or 10 minutes not get a bite, but when you get one, it's sort of, you know, it's normally on, because that's the sort of style of fish in a bigger, there we go, there's another one. So you can see how it does work when it's good. You can stop feeding and still catch a lot of fish. And like I said, some days, I can remember a match at Boston I fished, I've had like 180 odd pounds, something like that, and I've literally not fed a single pellet. I've probably used, they're big fish, I've probably used 20 pellets in my whole session, and you've had 180 pounds. So yeah, they do definitely work. It's a nice chunky F1, that one. But it definitely works in situations, like I said, where it's perhaps not quite as hectic as this. At least these fish have allowed me to show you what it's all about. Let's see if we can catch another one. And sometimes, you know, you can incorporate the twos. You could slap your rig in amongst your bait. So if you find that you stop getting bites with this slapping, you think, definitely feel I need a few more fish in there, you could introduce a little bit of bait and then slap in amongst your bait. But normally for me, there's a lot of venues that I fish where it can be absolutely deadly. There we go. Just like it can be so deadly without feeding anything, you're just creating all that noise. And if you are going to feed, do it now, you know, sneak in 5 or 6 pellets. So now you're not getting your rig in amongst the pellets, but you're still making a little bit of noise while you're playing this one. You know, literally 5 or 6 in your hand, bang, in your peg. And now when you slap over there in a little while, you're going to catch another one. So what I'm going to do is, as it's working here, I'm going to catch a few more on this, and then we have got a final one to show you, whoa, which is definitely one that you cannot ignore. There we go, the fishing was good on that, but definitely not as good as the other 3 that I've already shown you. But like I said, it's because the situation we're sitting in. Another day, bigger fish, less activity inside your feed. This could be your number 1 rig. But there's one more I want to show you. And the reason I've left this one till last definitely isn't because it's the worst. In fact, I'd probably say it's the method that wins the most matches in the summer, but the reason why it wins is because of the situation. Now, this is a mugging rig, so I'll quickly talk you through it, and then I'll explain why it's not always the one. But whenever you're shallow fishing, make sure you have this one set up. So top kit elastic same, 018 mainline exactly the same. The biggest difference, all the rig, everything's exactly the same as the shallow rig that you've just seen, but the biggest difference, look at the distance between my hands, is the float. So the elastic tip is a big long line of lash, because what mugging is sight fishing. Now, the reason why it's so effective but also so ineffective is because, let's take today for example, I couldn't use this rig. I could fish with this rig for ages and not catch anything because there's nothing to mug. When I'm looking outside, always wear glasses when shallow fishing, but just scanning my eyes out here, there's no fish sitting shallow. You're looking for big fish cruising just below the surface, and what you're doing is, I've got footage of it because we've filmed another Match Masterclass, so you'll be able to see what I'm talking about, but you're swinging it in front of fish and they grab it instantly. So if you're in a situation where you've got 50, 100, 200 fish sitting in front of you, it's literally like hook a duck. You swing it in front of them, got it, get that one in, swing in front of the next one, got it. And that's why this rig is probably responsible for the most match wins. But the problem is with it is, if this lake was full today, like I said, I'm the only one here, but even if it was full, you might find one corner, which may be the far corner up the other side or the corner to my left, all of the fish are up in the water up there, and that person just absolutely runs away with it because they're the ones that they can target what fish they're fishing for, and they can catch them super quick. So if you're in a situation like that, this will be your number 1 rig, but I can't demonstrate it today. You'll have to watch some old footage of that because there's no fish here to mug. But within those 5 that I've just covered, one of them will be the best on the day. I can't end there without catching a fish. So for example, for me, the best rig is the Overshotted rig. But just quickly, just before I go out and catch him, one thing I do want to mention about that mugging is quickly on the baits. There's two that are very, very good. Now, in all bags of pellets, you get slightly lighter ones. And what I do is I keep a tub here. You can see how bright these are. 8mm pellets are great for mugging, but you can see how bright these ones are compared to, I know these are 6mm, but you might get the idea. Can you see the contrast? So a really white pellet is very, very good for dobbing, normally an 8mm. Again, things like meat, maggots, stuff like that. Any sort of bait that's big in their face, they hear the plop and they grab it. You just swing it in front of fish. But another one that's really good is a red pellet. Now, you can do what I've got. I've got a tub of red pellets just because I keep them with me all the time. They're sort of my mugging pellet, a white pellet or a red one. But if you want to just do some out of the bag, the one shot flavour and colour enhancement, just give it a quick skirt in here. You can see, look, straight away, I got to the bank. I've now got some red pellets that absolutely smell amazing as well. So you can just do your own. I'm going to get some red hands for this. All the love for the camera. But there you go, look, red pellet, really, really good for mugging. I don't know why. Bright white or bright red, really, really good for that. So that's a couple of little quick touches on the bait. But yeah, going back to what we've been talking about, it's never just about picking one rig up and catching on it all day. Certainly think about the situations that you've been given in front of you. Have a look at the rules. What rigs can I use? What rigs can't I use? Because even like the mugging rigs and stuff like that, quite often, you know, you're not allowed to mug and stuff like that. So you do have to be very careful to what you can and can't use. And, oh, I've just decided to tangle my rig. I thought that would be a good way to end it. But yeah, this one, I'm hopefully going to prove it now, isn't going to let me down. But if you can, an overshotted rig, in my opinion, will outfish pretty much everything in situations where when fish are within your feed. I honestly can't say how good it is. And just before I shoot off, it's worth mentioning that this has been a very, very quick insight into 5 different methods. One of those 5 will be good on the day, but if you want a detailed one of how to do each of them, I have done a Match Masterclass, I believe, on all of them. I certainly have Overshotted, Jigger and mugging. Definitely done a full Match Masterclass on those. So I'll put links below. And I've even done some underwater footage of some of these rigs as well, so that's well worth a watch. So if you want a more in-depth look at anything we've done today, check out those links. But I hope that it's given you the confidence just to prove that, you know, a little bit of thought process, a little bit of planning, you can pick what rig is best for you and you can catch absolutely loads of fish. And there we go, that's going to be one for us to say bye on. So I hope that's all made sense. Anything you want more info on, drop me a message personally. Put it in the comments and I will answer them for you. And yeah, you're going to have a wicked day's fishing. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and obviously we'll be back very shortly with another Match Masterclass.